As a leader, a business owner, reputation is your lifeblood. Trust is the social currency of today's digital first world, and it's in short supply, which is good news if you're a credible, mission-driven entrepreneur or a professional, someone who has the runs on the board and who is seen not as someone with something to sell, but as someone with something to teach. But you need to be intentional about it. As we talk about here often on the podcast, there are many variables involved in building a genuine thought leader brand in the marketplace today. Let's be clear. People don't want to be sold something. They want to buy something. And the best way to get someone to seek out the opportunity to buy from you is to position yourself as the unquestionable authority in your space, someone they would be lucky to have a chance to do business with. This is what PR agency owner Rusty Shelton calls the authority advantage. Rusty is a best-selling author, entrepreneur, and keynote speaker. He comes from Austin in Texas, and he has a long history in helping brands and thought leaders master the new media landscape. He has a new book out called The Authority Advantage, and we'll hear all about that as well. But let's get into the interview. Welcome to the show, Rusty, all the way from Texas in Austin, the home of South by Southwest, which I believe at time of recording has only recently gone by.
It is, yes. Just wrapped up, and we've got about 50% of the traffic we did 10 days ago, so we're all good.
Ready to rock and roll. Everyone can catch a breath. Thanks for your time. You've written you've co-written a new book called The Authority Advantage, but also you've got a day gig as the CEO and founder of Zilker Media. Why don't you walk us through a thumbnail sketch on Zilker Media, and then so people can get a bit of context of who you are and what you do, and then we'll move into the book side of things, because there's a lot to unpack.
For sure. Well, thank you again for having me, Trevor. I really appreciate it. So Zilker Media is actually our second agency. So the first agency was an agency called Shelton Interactive. We founded back in 2010, got acquired in 2016. And that first agency was really all about book marketing. So we launched some of the biggest books in the world. The One Thing, worked with Tom Rath and Gary Keller and many others, and learned a ton about how to build thought leadership. The challenge with that first agency, Trevor, is when you're launching books, you've got about a 6-month window to launch the book. Yep. And even when the campaign goes great, at the end of it, it's, hey, Rusty, you guys are awesome. Let me call you in 3 years when my next book comes out. And so, again, that one got acquired by a strategic buyer back in 2016 that I still do a lot of work with today. But the new agency, the idea was, let's take everything that we learned in building thought leadership for authors, and let's apply it to companies, to institutions who right now, as are trusted less than they've ever been trusted before. And so this idea of leading as a thought leader with something to teach versus a company with something to sell is really one that's working very well for them. So that's the work that we do now at Zilker, and April 1st will be 6 years for the agency.
Excellent. And what's some of the names you've been working with, particularly the authors, whether it's Zilker or prior, some of the names people would know?
Yes, this book behind me, The One Thing, Gary Keller's co-founder of Keller Williams Realty, and Jay Papazan are the co-authors of that book. John Acuff, Sally Hogshead, 35 New York Times, Wall Street Journal bestsellers there. Chicken Soup for the Soul is another, big global brand that I know a lot of your local listeners will know. So the book industry to me is just something I've always been passionate about. I know you've written a couple of books as well, and just the ability to teach at scale is so valuable in that format. And again, with kind of the new agency, we're still doing probably 30% of our client base are still authors, speakers, individual thought leaders. But again, where we're seeing the biggest impact from this idea of building authority is helping business owners, CEOs, leaders to punch above their weight class in terms of visibility and trust by, again, kind of shifting the market perception from operator with something to sell to instead, mission-driven thought leader, authority with something to teach.
Yeah, I like that. And we'll unpack that, because there's a number of shifts that I know you wrote about in the book. And I guess the other part is just walk us a bit through the book. You're a co-author of it, The Authority Advantage. Why did you write the book, and how long did it take what was the gestation period? I'm always interested in authors, how long it took them to get it onto the virtual shelves.
Well, it actually just got here to the office, so I'm holding a copy of it here. But title of it's "The Authority Advantage: Building Thought Leadership Focused on Impact, Not Ego." So this book you see over my left shoulder here was our last book, also co-written with Adam, called Authority Marketing, and the focus of that book was, really how do you go about meaningfully building what I think a lot of leaders see as just kind of opaque and overwhelming, which is thought leadership. A lot of people talk about it. Very few people know kind of how to go about building it. So that book really zeroed in on that. What we found with that book, Trevor, was for a lot of leaders, the word marketing, when they saw that, they were kind of throwing it over the fence to their marketing team or their PR folks, as opposed to, really kind of internalizing what they needed to focus on, which is starting to get a bit more visible themselves. And so this book, the new one, which comes out in mid-May, The Authority Advantage, really the focus there is we're kind of grabbing leaders by the shoulders with this one and saying, hey, the work you used to do as a leader, kind of what you may think of servant leadership, which typically up to this point for many leaders has been, let me put my head down behind the scenes and over deliver for team members, over deliver for clients and partners, which, by the way, you got to continue to do. But the shift that's happened now is that if that's all you're doing behind the scenes, you're really limiting the impact and limiting the value of what you do as a leader, because the only people that can benefit from that are those that happen to directly interact with you. And so kind of the cause that we're trying to champion with this new book for well-meaning, really high-quality leaders is, if you're going to punch above your weight class, if you're going to really deliver value for your company, you've got to come out alongside the corporate brand or the institutional brand, not in front of it, but out alongside. It really is an on-ramp back to the business. And so what we're really trying to do with this book is show leaders, number one, why it's crucial to do it right now, because we know trust in those institutions is at an all-time low. And then number two, really pragmatically, how do you go about doing it in an authentic, mission-driven way?
And it's for kind of anyone who's wanting to carve out a thought leadership positioning or an expert positioning as well in the marketplace, and the tools and all the things. If you're in a smaller company, it's probably a little bit easier, but you've still got to make the effort to do it. And you may not have the resources of a big company, but all this is doable. Just quickly before we get into it, because I'm very keen to unpack the three big shifts to build a bit of context around this. But in terms of let's call it for what it is. We're using the phrases personal branding and thought leadership, two phrases that I use a lot, and two phrases that have, over the period of time, have lost a bit of meaning in the marketplace. And people make assumptions about personal branding and thought leadership and the like. Well, how do you deal with people that say, personal branding, I don't want to craft a false persona of myself, or thought leadership. When leaders talk about that, there are assumptions around what it means, and means different things to different people. How do you set people straight?
Yeah, well, a couple things there, Trevor. Number one, I think the reaction that a lot of leaders have to this phrase, personal branding or building authority or thought leadership, typically is some version of, throwing up a little bit in their mouth, right? It's a recoil. And in many cases, when I'm giving a speech, I can see a recoil from the audience just in the mention of the phrase. Yeah. And by the way, I understand it. And the reason why, Trevor, is for most leaders or practitioners, our minds immediately go to people that are doing this the wrong way, right? People that are building ego-driven, hey, look at me kind of brands. And so to get this out of the way at the start for your viewers, for your listeners, when we talk about this idea of building an authority advantage, building thought leadership, we are not interested in building a, hey, look how smart you are kind of brand or something that strokes your ego. It's actually completely the opposite. It's really a focus on how can you be the messenger, not the message. So in other words, what we know, again, Gallup put out a study last year, trust in institutions, in businesses, in nonprofits is at an all-time low. If you have a message to communicate and you are leading with the quote unquote corporate brand, your audience is recoiling from that. They are more skeptical than they've ever been of it before. And so the reason for a leader to kind of come out alongside the corporate brand is because the speed to trust for you as an individual, if you have built an authentic, mission-driven brand, is dramatically quicker than it is for the business. And so, Trevor, what I find for a lot of those leaders, the light bulb, if you will, on this is, okay, this is not really about building a, hey, look how smart Trevor is kind of brand. This is about communicating a message and making an impact that we're going to go a lot further, a lot quicker, a lot cheaper if the leader is willing to be the messenger, again, not the message.
Yeah, I like that. And when let's use that as a jumping off point to shift number one. So from corporate branding to authority branding. So basically, you've almost just covered it there. Really, is that there's a lack of trust in businesses and corporate names, brand names, business names, and that if the leader is out there out front, or leaders, and they're out front and they're visible and human and adding value and all of that sort of things, then they're going to be a lot more trusted. And then the halo effect goes back onto the business brand, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the way the analogy I like to use for this is the business is the interstate or the highway, right? We want as many of the right customers, the right partners, the right team members as we can get on that highway. I want the leader to be the on-ramp to the highway. And so we've got today, Trevor, and again, especially for your listeners and your viewers that are small, medium-sized businesses, they're competing in industries where they're going head to head against corporate brands that have been around longer, that have much bigger marketing budgets. If you think about that, if you're trying to go logo versus logo, and you're a small, medium-sized business, and you're going head to head against a much bigger company that's been around longer, it's a fight you're not going to win. The other thing that we know, again, based on the statistics, is it takes a lot longer, a lot more money, a lot more time to build rapport and trust when you lead with the company. And so that's really the shift that we're seeing right now is all of us as consumers, when we are seeking information, we are going to trust it in a quicker way when it's coming from an individual that we view as authentic. And I think that's the big thing also, Trevor, is just for your listeners to think about is right now, whether they like it or not, there's a brand in place for every single one of them. We define branding in the book as creating an image in the minds of your audience. And whether you like it or not, your audience is getting an image of you before they walk in the room, right, for that appointment, before they decide to take that interview. And so the question I would ask the people listening to this is, all right, if that image is being created, whether you like it or not, don't you want to, number one, own it, right? And number two, just be intentional about what that image is. And so I think that's a really important point for a lot of leaders is whether you like it or not, there is an image being created for you. Do you want it to be a commoditized image of just another operator with something to sell? Or do you want it to be more congruent with who you actually are, which is that mission-driven thought leader, that person that wants to make an impact?
So you use examples in the book, which I always love examples in the book, and I love giving examples on the show just to bring things to life. Walk us through Dr. Andy Simon. She was the CEO of Simon Associates Management Consultants, and she wasn't a believer in the start and is now.
Yeah, Dr. Simon, I think, is a really good example of this in a very competitive industry, right? There's a lot of people competing for attention in the management consulting space. And what she recognized early on is that most of those companies were being positioned exactly the same way, right? It was a corporate brand. It was stock photos on the website. It was the same old jargon. And she knew that it's going to be really difficult for her to stand out if she approached it that way. So she got over that initial recoil that you talk about. And Patty Brennan, who's another example that we gave in the book, which is one of the most successful female-owned wealth managers here in the United States, similar reaction, right? Which is an initial recoil. I don't want to build a brand about me. And again, as we just talked about, building an authority advantage is not about building a brand about you. It's you being willing to be the messenger, not the message. And so Dr. Simon, through writing a book, through doing more media, through creating a brand, recognized that she could really scale her teaching and scale her time in a way that allowed her to really differentiate from all the others in her space. So whether it is, Patty Brennan in the wealth management space, Dr. Simon in the management consulting space, the way that you kind of pull yourself out of that stack of commoditization is, you're willing to kind of lean into more of the teaching and content side versus, again, the corporate brand.
Yeah. So that's the shift. Number one that you talk about is the from corporate brand to authority branding. Number two is from corporate media to micro media, one of my favorite topics. Let's walk through that. Big shift, big shift.
I love seeing this just going through your content. I know it's been a big focus for at least one of your books. And that is, all of us as the media consuming public, we have shifted our attention away from large generic media that we increasingly see as biased or filtered, but more importantly, Trevor, that has not given us a great return on our investment of time because of how overgeneralized it is. And we're redeploying that attention to what we call micro media, right? Individual podcasts, individual newsletters, individual YouTube channels that are giving us exactly what we're looking for. So, that shift, and again, trust being the other big reason for it, is such a huge opportunity to leaders that are willing to dive in. And I know for a lot of members of your audience, they may be sitting there thinking, okay, well, I missed the boat, right? I'm 10 years too late to dive in on a podcast, or I'm 5 years too late to actually ramp up on YouTube or LinkedIn. And what I often tell leaders is you can make up a lot of ground really quickly if you approach it the right way. And so don't let this feeling of, hey, I missed the boat, keep you from jumping in.
Yeah. And the opportunities with micro media today is, you can really home in on a particular topic really, deeply that people might not be, they certainly wouldn't probably get in the mainstream media, and be able to attract the right people to your brand. It's not about attracting everyone to that channel or that podcast or whatever. It's about attracting the right people who are aligned with your values, and, maybe they want a contrarian view, but they like you. They begin to trust over a period of time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's really about reaching your niche and doing it in an effective way over time. And Trevor, the other thing I should mention is what we find works really well on the micro media side. So anytime as a leader that you're creating content, whether it's a podcast, a book, newsletter, and beyond, I find a lot of leaders, when they go down this road, the initial thought is, all right, I gotta play this formal thought leader. I gotta put the suit and tie on, and I've got to be, what I've got in my head, my audience is looking for as a thought leader. And my encouragement to leaders is actually the opposite is what works. We want you to be more of yourself. We want you to lean into your personality, your interests, your quirks, whatever that niche might be. And the reason why, Trevor, is because we look at ChatGPT coming online. We look at just the amount of just buckets and buckets and buckets of competitive content in whatever your topic area is. The only reason for me to follow you versus all the other people is because I identify with you. You made me laugh. Your personality is something that pulls me in, and I trust you more as a result of you being willing to be vulnerable and being willing to be honest and kind of take me behind the scenes. And so I hope for a lot of people that's empowering. And what I find for a lot of leaders is it is kind of empowering, where it's like, okay, what actually is going to work here is not me trying to be something I'm not. It's actually me leaning more into what makes me different.
Yeah, and that affinity, I don't think it can ever be underplayed. It's to build that affinity over time of people who want to hear from you. They want to read your stuff. They're going to follow you. That can't be undersold.
It can't be undersold at all. I mean, the leverage that it provides wherever you go in the future, whatever you might do in the future, but also what I find is just like the impact that you can have. And for a lot of leaders, they start hearing from people halfway around the world, right? So you might hear from somebody here in Austin, or I might hear from somebody in Australia that, this has sent them off into a different direction that has resulted in a ton of wins for them. And you'd never reach that person otherwise. And so I think that's the other part that for leaders, it just is the fuel. Once they get over that kind of first hump and they start to get some of that feedback, it becomes, really a no-brainer from there.
And I'll add that you're not going to get it right straight away. I mean, you're not going to probably find your voice if you're going out into a podcast or doing videos or even writing. It's going to take time to hone your voice and to bring that out, and it will always be evolving. So don't wait to get it to get it perfect, because nothing will ever happen. And the third shift is from selling to buying. This is a big one, I feel.
Oh man, it's huge. It's huge. And this to me is one of the biggest things you get when you build authority, right? When you build that third party credibility, is you start to become more of a magnet for potential customers who are coming to you to learn more about working with you. Nobody wants to be sold to, right? And we're in an environment right now where people that are selling to us, or that we perceive as selling to us, we're out, right? We're not interested. And so what I like on the authority side is, just let's go back to the Patty Brennan example, which we opened the book with. Patty is somebody who, regularly featured on CNBC, speaks at Forbes, has a big podcast that she's built. And, if I've just sold my business and I'm looking at 5 different wealth advisors, right? And I Google all 5 of their names because I've gotten referred to each one of them.
Yep.
4 of those 5 people that I Google, I'm going to get a suit and tie picture, in front of a bookcase of books and a corporate logo, right? And by the way, I'm in the position of leverage with each of those 4 people. I'm interviewing them. When I Google Patty's name, I get to her website. I've got a hero shot of her up on stage. We've got a Forbes logo right behind her on stage. Well, I don't know Patty. I do have an image in my mind for somebody that's on that stage next to that logo. I'm feeling lucky to get an appointment with Patty. And sure, I'll wait 2 months to get in the room with her. And so what happens there is those other 4 people, again, I'm interviewing them. They're selling to me. With Patty, I'm going in, trust has been built before I get in the room. And it's not because Patty said, hey, look how smart I am. Hey, look how successful I am. It's because the visuals said what we didn't want her to say about herself, which is, this is somebody you can trust. This is a teacher. This is somebody who has built third-party credibility. And so I'm going right to, all right, tell me what I should do, because I see you as the authority versus the operator.
And you call that pre-engagement.
Yes, pre-engagement. So yeah, exactly. So we, define branding in the book as creating an image in the minds of your audience, right? So super simple definition, create an image in the minds of your audience. There are 2 phases to doing that today. So phase 1 is what you just mentioned there, pre-engagement. This is before I get in the room with you, before I work with you, before I take that job, before I buy the book and read it. And so in phase 1, because the image you create in my mind is not created as a result of over-delivering on my expectations or giving a great speech or writing a great book, it's created page 1 of Google. From there, if we're fortunate, it's then created on your website or your LinkedIn profile. And that initial image, Trevor, as you know, is either congruent, right, with what I'm going to get once I cross over and buy or take that meeting, or it's an image that's either, non-existent because I can't find you, even though I've been referred to, I know your name and I still can't find you. Or if I can find you, maybe it doesn't really differentiate you from all the other options that I have. So we go as deep as is helpful on that side. And then phase 2, post-engagement, is, this is once we work together, once I buy that product, or once I decide to invest with Patty, or once I bring Trevor in to give a speech, and the image that's in my mind there, of course, is dependent on, did you over deliver or under deliver? And what I find for a lot of leaders, probably a lot of people listening to this podcast, they're over delivering consistently in phase 2, right? If somebody makes it to phase 2 with them, you get a happy customer driving positive word of mouth. Where I find a lot of people are missing opportunity is they may say, all right, our firm is entirely built on referrals. And that's because they're over delivering in phase 2, which again is table stakes. You have to do that, obviously.
Yep.
But for a lot of those people, they're getting a ton of referrals that they're never hearing from, because those people getting referred to them either can't find them, or what they're finding in phase 1, is kind of making them question whether or not that company's a fit.
Yeah. I always use the example of, coming from a PR background, that things like your blog and your podcast and everything, people might not necessarily read it, all the time or listen to you or whatever, but it serves as a point of validation. So you're exactly right in terms of, people have been referred to you, they check you out. What will they find? Will it do the professional you justice? They dig a bit deeper. They look at your blog or your socials or whatever it is and form a picture. But if often that is validation on top of discovery. And we all talk about discovery and SEO and all of that sort of stuff. More leads, more sales, all of that. But the validation plays a massive role in everything.
It does. And you hit on what I think is perhaps the lowest hanging fruit for people when they start to build authority or build a brand is they empower the people that already know and love them to refer them more. In other words, even if I know you're the best accountant in the world, I may not be as comfortable referring you if I know my friend is going to Google your name and find a website, your nephew built 18 years ago that looks like you're out of business or, whatever it might be. And so getting your brand right, the quickest impact is the people that know and love you are going to refer you more. And by the way, the people that are getting referred to you are actually going to raise their hand for that appointment because you have built trust before they get in the room. And so I think that side of it is, this is one of the biggest parts of writing a book is you empower people with extra validation to drive business your way or to put you on the right stages. And so I think that's a really important piece because to your point earlier, it's really hard to reach people that have never heard of you before. And it takes time to do that. And so the quickest impact of this is, again, empowering people that know and love you to talk about what you're doing more.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to 10 tacks of the gaining the authority advantage. So you have what you call the Master Authority Plan. Three cornerstones of that.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of your listeners, really the starting point of that Master Authority Plan is really thinking about discoverability and making sure that they've got kind of the foundation of a brand that number one, they can own search for, but number two, they're creating that image. So this is tactical, but Trevor, I think for a lot of members of your audience, going to be really, really important. So if I am referred to you, let me put myself in the shoes of somebody that's just been referred to your business. The question I want you to ask yourself, if I go looking for you by name right now, if I Google your name, number one, can you be found? And if you can't be found, there are one of two reasons why. Either you've just intentionally been a ghost online, and if so, all right, Trevor and I are going to try to work you past that today. The much more common reason I can't find you is because you have a brand name that is exceedingly difficult for you to own. So David Meerman Scott, Trevor, who wrote the foreword for our book, one of my favorite, marketing P authors through the years, his name's David Scott.
It is.
Right. And what he recognized early in his career is that, his name is a piece of digital real estate. And if his name is David Scott, he's standing on a piece of real estate with hundreds of other David Scotts. It's going to be each of them trying to build the tallest tower in terms of visibility. It was just a name he was not going to own search for. And so when he added in that middle name, David Meerman Scott, he walks across the street to a piece of real estate that's empty. And with the first brick, he owns search. And so one of the things I want to encourage your audience members to think about, do you have a name that you can own search for? And if not, there's one of two reasons. Either it's, really common name like David Scott, or oftentimes, Trevor, I'll see somebody's got a super unique name, but they're unlucky enough to share it with an axe murderer from the 70s or an Olympian or whatever it might be. Yeah. So think about that. And for those people that are listening to this, if you don't own your name, firstnamelastname.com, go grab it. Right. So, and while you're there, if it's available, grab your kids' names, grab your grandkids' names. That real estate's valuable today. It's only going to get more valuable in the future. But foundationally, Trevor, and I'd be curious on kind of your opinion on this, but I always want people to have a name that they can own search for. And so if that means adding a middle initial or a middle name, it becomes foundationally important.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's something that if you can get the domain name, do it. I mean, there's a lot more options now. There's, I've got a .me.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of different options to get that name now. And so at least get a domain name that's going to work for you and sit on it if you have to. Or start blogging under it, like put some content on it, but get it up there. One of my clients, Tristan White in Australia, is he's an author and an entrepreneur and a leadership mentor. And there is another Tristan White, and he's an Olympian, as it happens. And for a long time there, Tristan, the entrepreneur, couldn't be found, but he's got his domain name and he wins. He wins the fight. And he's more active on social media, whereas and blogging and stuff, whereas he wasn't, in the earlier days. So I've seen it, come to life in that. And the David Miman Scott story is a perfect one. And this is when you used the word before. I'm starting to use it a lot now as intentional. When you're intentional about it, then you start seeing these little things that you can do that over a long period of time will make a heck of a difference.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. And consistency, I think, is one of the real keys there, right? It's just being willing to show some grit and show some determination early on until you get over that hump. Again, to your point earlier with the time that it takes. So that's step one, is, do you have a name that you can own, search for? Step two is, if I do find that LinkedIn profile, if I do find that website, what image are you then creating in somebody's minds? And so again, what we got to remember in phase one, when I land on that LinkedIn profile, again, I've been referred to you. There's no image in my mind yet for you. And so when I land on that LinkedIn profile, if you're leading with, either just kind of the normal suit and tie headshot, or you're leading with the sunset picture over the Sydney Harbor, or you're leading with, a stock photo, cool picture, but it does nothing to build trust with somebody that doesn't yet know you. And so we often talk about in phase one, the single most important principle that exists in terms of building trust with somebody that doesn't yet know you is the principle of authority by association. So back to Patty Brennan. I may not know Patty. I do have an image in my mind for Forbes or for CNBC or for, whatever that particular award is. And so what happens is Patty's image is along for the ride with the image in my mind for that brand, right? Trust accelerator. And so what we often talk about, Trevor, is kind of walking a fine line back to this idea of not building an ego-driven brand. Essentially, on one side of the coin, we want the visuals to say what we don't want a leader to say about themselves, which is, top of her category thought leader, main stage speaker, wrote the book on the topic. In other words, authority, somebody with something to teach. And then the flip side, the entirety of the content strategy, from the blog to LinkedIn to the book to the podcast, is all mission-driven thought leadership, right? If you never take another step with me, I'm going to leave you better off as a result of having read this or listened to it. But as you know, that audience is not interested in listening or reading until they recognize that person's the person to teach them on that topic. And so I think it's really important for people listening to this. They may be saying, all right, Rusty, yeah, cool. If I had a Forbes picture, I'd be using it. I don't have that yet. Or if I had a book, I'd be using that. There are ways to create images where it puts you in a setting that connotes authority. Like, worst case scenario, give me a picture of you with a podcast mic and headphones on in that LinkedIn header. I may not, know you. I'm seeing you now in a situation where you're teaching or connoting authority. If it's a speaking picture, we see that work really well. And so I'm curious for you, Trevor, as you're working with clients, when we think about this idea of authority by association, so building trust with some of that third-party credibility, or do you typically lead with a speaking picture or kind of an action shot that way, or how do you approach that?
Well, I've got, the strip of logos like everyone, I guess, on that regard. I do less speaking now, a deliberate choice. But when I was going hardcore speaking, yes, I was up on stage with the mic wrapped around and that side of things. So I did used to lead with that as well. And I think I think it's a really important. I like the phrase you use, trust accelerators, and it's that they're cognitive shortcuts, aren't they? As Daniel Kahneman, I think, maybe talked about cognitive shortcuts at one point, and we haven't got much time. Well, we're all time poor. We're flicking through things. We need cognitive shortcuts to make decisions rightly or wrongly. And I like where this conversation's going, because it's right. Yes, a lot of people do the logo thing, and some, I think, it's quite disingenuous. We see it. People who are playing the game, gaming the system, they'll do that. We're talking about doing things, in a way that's genuine and legitimate. So put that thing aside. But even if you might not be on Forbes, but there might be podcasts you've been on, and there might be that's where you can write your book, even if it's a mini book, just to get going. If it's your own podcast, I'd call them trust accelerators. I'm going to use that term now, trust accelerators.
Good. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the way to think about it for leaders, because again, somebody is sizing you up from afar, whether you like it or not. And if the trust accelerators are buried in your bio, and I got to go 450 words deep in that bio to find, all right, wow, she shared the stage with Brene Brown or Steve Forbes or whoever it might be. We're missing an opportunity to instantly create an image. If you have leaders that are listening to this, Trevor, who want to do more speaking, that's one of the big goals that they have, which, I find for a lot of leaders that want to go down this road, that's a big focus. Question I want you to ask yourself in phase one right now, is there a single thing from an image perspective that puts you in a setting that tells me you're a speaker? So I see a lot of leaders that are, wanting to do more speaking, and their bio picture is, again, it's the headshot.
Yep.
And there's nothing that's positioning them that way. The biggest concern a meeting planner has is they're about to put you on the first stage you've ever been on, or the biggest stage you've ever been on. And so what I like most about speaking pictures, even if you don't want to give a ton of speeches, and that's not, the big focus for you, it positions you as somebody with something to teach rather than somebody with something to sell. And so my encouragement for a lot of people listening to this, they've been speaking. Maybe they've done over the last 5 or 10 years quite a few engagements. My guess is there are pictures that never made it through to you, or that you could get access to. That needs to be your header picture on LinkedIn. That's the hero shot in your bio. That's the first thing I want to see when I get to your website. It's not the stock photo of the smiling couple. It's not the corporate logo. It's images that put you in a setting that position you as somebody with something to teach, somebody I'm lucky to get an appointment with.
Just something that's come to mind, and I'm a believer that if you want to do speaking, at least have a speaking tab on your website at least, and talk about it, and you'll build that up over time as you do speaking. So it's not faking it till you make it. I mean, it's really, I'm ready. You're telling the world that you're ready to speak, and you're out there, you're doing it. It doesn't matter whether it's a community meetup. You can still get a photo with someone, with people's heads, but the back of people's heads watching you. But what do you think about? If you're running a business and you got the business brand, corporate might be a little bit, on a bigger organisation, it might be a little bit different. But people having their own website, so we said to be found, and you've got you've got a business, Silka Media, but you've also got your own website, Rusty Shelton. So what's your thinking on whether people should go down that path of having their own website, and whether it's just a blog or just more of a brochure, or speaking feature piece or something like that?
I wholeheartedly recommend that CEOs, leaders, practitioners who are going down this road of building authority, it absolutely makes sense to have a home-based website for themselves personally. And here's why. If I, Trevor, have just heard you give an interview on a podcast, you made me laugh, you challenged me, I want to learn more. If I Google your name and the only place I get to is a bio page on a corporate website, again, my guard is up when I get to that site. You're going to have a tougher time extending your interaction with me within a corporate website versus I land on trevoryoung.me. And I can see, okay, wow, somebody who is speaking right to me, he's positioned as somebody with something to teach, he's authentic. Well, your opportunity to extend your interaction with me is much greater there. And so again, back to kind of the highway analogy that I like to use is just your company, your institution, your nonprofit is a highway. We want as many of the right clients, team members, et cetera, on it. That personal brand website is an on-ramp. That LinkedIn profile is an on-ramp. And by the way, for a lot of leaders listening to this, your biggest untapped marketing resource at your company, I promise you, is not the corporate logo. It is the thought leadership of individual subject matter experts within your company. And the most exciting thing for me, Trevor, over the last decade of doing this is the light bulb is finally going off at bigger institutions, at bigger brands, at hospital systems, at educational institutions, that they've kind of kept all these subject matter experts sort of behind the corporate logo for years and years. And what they're recognizing is when they put those people out front, they get a lot further, a lot quicker. And so again, small, medium-sized businesses, when you do this, you give yourself a chance to really punch above your weight class with what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. No, I really like the on-ramp as well. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like the entree in, and, taking people, it allows you to humanize the company. You know, as the leader of a business, you are in a good position to humanize that business, and people do business with people, not logos. So you talk about step one is sort of like defining that brand, then building that brand, then showcasing that brand. What's, like I agree with, you've got to be found and that side of things. This is a long haul though. We're not talking a campaign. Like building your brand is an always on thing, isn't it? And it will evolve.
It will evolve. Absolutely. Over time, it will evolve. And what I find is the more common mistake, Trevor, is I find a lot of leaders jump right to the fun stuff. Right? They jump right to the LinkedIn newsletter, starting that podcast, doing more PR, and they don't have a name that they can own search for. And they don't have an image that they're creating that actually accelerates trust with somebody and converts them. And so one of the biggest mistakes that I see is leaders are kind of going through the motions of doing some social media, doing, the podcast stuff, but they're not actually set up to convert the impressions that they're generating because they don't have the right brand in place, because they're not clear on who they are and they're not clear on the value that they're providing. So step one is always defining the brand and then showcasing that brand effectively with that authority by association. Now we get to the fun stuff in terms of going out and reaching that audience, teaching, creating content. And we talk a little bit in the book about, how we recommend that leaders organize their content strategy. One of the most common mistakes I see for leaders is, the analogy that we like to use is your content strategy is your personal newspaper. And for most well-meaning leaders that are going down this road, the tendency is to fill the newspaper with op-eds or opinion pieces, meaning it's the Rusty Shelton show again and again and again. We got two problems with that. Number one, you're going to get pretty bored if all you're serving up is your own stuff. Number two, if you're a leader that's starting off with a smaller audience, you got friends and family and some work contacts, there's not enough people yet that know to pay attention to just your stuff. And so it becomes a slow grind. So we talk about you-driven content, relationship-driven content, and news-driven content as kind of the three categories that we like to see content organized into. But really it's this idea, Trevor, of thinking more like the media than a marketer with what you're doing.
I like that. Let's do a thumbnail sketch on each one of those. So you-driven content is that your opinion piece type thing? Is that what that is?
It is. So that's all the content that connects back to your intellectual property. So it's your perspective, your teaching. It's a lot of the evergreen content, 5 ways to be a better leader, 4 ways to prepare for retirement, that kind of stuff. That category, Trevor, also includes your personal journey as a leader. So in other words, lessons learned along the way, your challenges that you battle through. The more self-deprecating, the more vulnerable that a leader is willing to be, the quicker that content's going to grow, right? And the further it's going to reach. That first category also includes anything that benefits you. So promotional stuff that talks about your book, et cetera. And in my experience, Trevor, that first category is like 95% of what most people are doing.
Yeah.
And it works great when people know to pay attention to it. If you don't have an audience yet, it is a slow grind. And those are the people usually that come up to me and say, I tried a blog. It didn't get me anywhere. I tried LinkedIn, didn't get me anywhere. And the reason why is because you're speaking on a stage in an empty auditorium to people that don't yet know to pay attention. And so I like for that to be 1/3 of the content strategy.
Yep.
Category 2, news-driven content. So that's one of two subcategories. Either it's calendar-driven, meaning, based on the time of year, we kind of know what's front of mind for people in your audience, or back to David Meerman Scott, newsjacking. So really looking at what's your audience paying attention to. I don't need you reporting the news. There's lots of people doing that. I need you promoting.
Commentary.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to be careful with what you wade into on the newsjacking side in terms of the appropriateness of the content, the lightning rod nature or not of the content. But what I find for leaders, if they're willing to be really topical with their content, they can go a long way really quickly.
And then that's a relevance thing. It's hot now. The angle's there. People are talking about it. Do you want to be part of that conversation? And how do you insert yourself in that conversation? But if you're not strategically aligned with it, it doesn't make any sense. So this is where the strategy comes in, as you're talking about, because you need to know those, I call them the spheres of conversation. What are those areas that you want to, the conversations you want to publicly be part of? And be out there commenting on. So I like that news-driven content, and then relationship-driven content.
Yeah, relationship-driven content, I find, is the single most effective way for leaders to connect time that they spend on content marketing with direct ROI for the business. So my favorite way to use content marketing is to use it as an excuse to reach out to somebody that we want the leader to build a relationship with, or as an excuse to involve somebody that leader thinks has a story that needs to be told. So an example of this, one of our biggest clients is one of the fastest growing regional banks here in Texas. You walk into the downtown lobby of this bank, brand new. It's all the stuff you'd expect from a modern bank branch, right? The thing that's kind of out of place, you turn to the right, there's a podcast studio in the bank branch. Okay. And what happens with that podcast, the bank president hosts it, and it's used by the bank as a way to curate content from investors, from key relationships in town, but also as a bridge to build relationships with people that they want to get to know. And by the way, Trevor, the interview is not, hey, Rusty, tell me why, our bank is the best bank ever. It's not a testimonial. It's all about the person that's being interviewed. But if I'm an investor and I get interviewed on that podcast, or I'm a customer and I get interviewed on that podcast, when I share that on LinkedIn, I'm waxing on about that bank and that president. So when you do relationship content the right way, you are empowering people to refer you in a way that they're winning as they do it. And so whether it's a podcast, whether it's involved, one of my favorite things to think about as you write a book is, all right, who are the 25 people that over the course of the next 5 years are going to be the most important people for the growth of your business or the impact of your message? Well, let's work backwards from that list of 25. Who does it make sense to tell a story about? Who should we interview? Who should we feature maybe in the Forbes blog that we're working on? So in other words, never do it in a way that's disingenuous. Never feature somebody just to get business, right? You need to feature people that bring value, but assuming it's somebody that's going to bring value, be really strategic about using your content as an excuse to reach out to somebody and either nurture an existing relationship or build a new one. Yeah.
I love it. What a great idea. Have a podcast studio in the bank. I love it. And it's just the message it sends, the message it sends. And as you said, you're walking in, looks like a bank. Whoa, what's that? It's, again, a cognitive shortcut. I didn't think I'd wake up today and be talking cognitive shortcuts, but here we are.
Here we are.
And I'm conscious of time, so thanks very much, Rusty. I love this topic. I'm pretty sure we could banter on all afternoon, or your afternoon, my morning. But One thing that was in the book that I really loved, and you've given us some great analogies. The big one I'm taking away is the on ramp and the highway. But you look at audience, because we're talking content, and as a thought leader and a leader, you want to be building an audience, and you've got the stadium analogy about your audience and breaking it down, and people who are customers and people who are not there yet. Walk us through that, will you? And there will be a term in there that's probably people in America will understand, and I'll try and decode it. So walk us through that one.
Well, if we've been told by our international rights agent that's probably going to get changed in whatever markets that may go into.
Okay.
So this is the college football fan in us as the author.
Yep.
So everybody listening to this has three audiences in place. Okay, so if you can imagine a stadium, whether it's a soccer stadium or a football stadium, whatever it might be, inside that stadium, we think of as season ticket holders, right? They are people who have already converted to whatever it is you're trying to drive. That might be they bought your service, or they've taken a job if that's the conversion you're trying to drive. In other words, they've converted to what, and everybody's got a certain number of people in their stadium. The second group is what we call tailgaters. And if you think about tailgaters, for those people that aren't familiar with that term, those are people that are right outside the stadium, and they're part of the conversation, right? You're engaged with them, but they've not yet decided to buy a ticket and come inside. All right. So in other words, you've got a chance to nurture that relationship with them and build rapport as you work them to the point that they're ready to raise that hand. And practically what that means is that's somebody that, maybe their budget hasn't come in for 2024 yet. Maybe that's somebody that is trying to figure out who's the right orthodontist in Sydney to go to. And they're looking at 4 different ones, and they're sizing it up, and they've got 2 years to size it up before they make that decision. Whatever reason, they haven't converted, but you've got a chance to do that over time. Future fans are people that, as we sit here today, have no idea who you are, but they're squarely in your target market, right? They could benefit tremendously from your service, product, etc. What we find from most people that are doing any kind of marketing is they spend a fortune in advertising, marketing, etc., to get to future fans, people who are squarely in your target market, never heard of you before. And in almost every case, Trevor, they're trying to take somebody from I've never heard of you before and drive them immediately into the stadium, which is a really difficult thing to do. I mean, you got to get really lucky to convert somebody immediately when they've never heard of you before. And so what Adam and I advocate in the book is the focus when you reach somebody who's never heard of you before is not trying to immediately sell them something. It is, how do you extend your interaction with them? In other words, how do you give them a reason to get on that email list, to subscribe to that LinkedIn newsletter? And this gets into lead magnets, and we won't go into the weeds of that. But really what you're trying to do is just give somebody a way to dip their toe in the water with your message, be it a quiz or a white paper or a webinar, et cetera, and get them into that tailgate, get them part of that group where you can extend your interaction and nurture them to the point that they're ready to rock.
So walk us through the tailgate, as in what is the tailgate in a sporting parlance, because we don't have that here in Australia. Is that people park? Well, I know they park their utes out the front of the stadium and they don't go in. Is that the thing? They party outside?
Well, so I'll give an example from Austin, Texas. So the University of Texas, the Longhorns, is our hometown college football team. So if Texas is playing a game at 7:00, that's when the actual game starts in the stadium. People are arriving outside the stadium at 8 or 9 a.m. to start smoking a brisket or start cooking out. And what happens at a tailgate is it's like a party outside the stadium. And it's called a tailgate because, back in the day, people would drop the tailgate down. You'd have a cooler of beer, you'd have food. And it's for a lot of people, that's all they do. And then they'll go home and watch the game. But for all the people that have tickets, they'll come tailgate and then they'll go inside the stadium when it happens. But it's a whole culture here in America, in particular around college sports, although it also happens for professional sports. But it's a really fantastic way to spend some time with friends, kind of before you walk in and start cheering for your team.
Yeah, nice. There you go. Just would decode that for people. Awesome. Rusty, really enjoyed the chat. The book is The Authority Advantage. I think you just said that I must have read an advance copy. It's out in May. Is that correct?
It's out in May. We just got physical copies in-house in the last couple of weeks. So it's out May 16th. We're doing our big launch up in New York the week before. But yeah, certainly would appreciate anybody that is looking to dive down, this road. It's a really good roadmap for that. And rustyshelton.com, you can learn a little bit more about the book, or head to theauthorityadvantage.com to learn more there as well.
Easily found.
That's right.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today and sharing your ideas and stories.
Trevor, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.